Welcome to Wonderland Unlocked. I'm Courtney, a certified peer support specialist, and this is Series 2, Through the Rabbit Hole, the beginning of self-discovery. I've fallen down my own rabbit hole, questioning everything along the way. Now, I'm here to support you as you explore the unknown, challenge what you believe, and uncover who you really are. Take a deep breath. The rabbit hole is waiting. Let's unlock Wonderland together. Imagine standing at the edge of a vast unknown, staring down into a rabbit hole that twists and turns beyond what your eyes can see. You don't know what's at the bottom. You don't know what's waiting for you on the other side, but something whispers in you, jump. Welcome back to Wonderland, my fellow wanderers. Today, we're talking about the first and perhaps the hardest step of self-discovery, daring to question everything. For most of my life, I didn't realize that I was playing a role. I thought I was just me, but looking back, I can see all the different versions of myself I created to survive. Versions built on the other people's expectations, on fear, on the desperate need to be accepted. I was the girl who made people laugh so they wouldn't look too closely. The girl who knew exactly what to say to avoid conflict. Or to cause conflict. The girl who performed, who adjusted, who blended in, or stood out. But there comes a moment, a crack in the illusion, where you start to feel like something doesn't fit. Maybe it's a whisper in the back of your mind. Maybe it's an ache you can't explain. Maybe it's a moment so small that no one else would even notice. But it shifts something inside of you. And once you start questioning, there's no going back. Falling through the cracks of my own mind felt a lot like Alice's fall down the rabbit hole. Slow at first, almost unnoticeable, until suddenly I was tumbling into something I couldn't control. I didn't have the words for what was happening. I just knew I felt something that was, wrong. Like Alice staring at the world through a distorted lens, I felt as if I were floating outside of myself, watching everything move around me, but never truly being part of it. At school, I struggled in ways I couldn't explain. It wasn't just the subjects, though. Those felt impossible too, though. It was everything. The way people interacted, the way friendships seemed effortless for everyone but me. I would sit in class staring at the homework in front of me, and my mind completely blank. Like Alice at the Mad Hatter's tea party, I felt lost in conversations that made sense to everyone but me. Always a step behind, always unsure of the rules. I wasn't lazy. I wasn't stupid. But my brain just wouldn't connect the dots. And I was terrified of what would happen if I just admitted that. So I lied. I nodded when teachers asked if I understood. I copied from classmates, got creative with excuses, weaving stories like the Cheshire Cat, shifting, disappearing, and adapting to whatever I thought would keep me safe. But no matter how well I played the part, the unease never left me. At home, there was no room for struggle. I had learned, just like Alice, facing the Queen of Hearts, that asking the wrong questions, showing the wrong kind of weakness, could be dangerous. That needing help meant I was the problem. That struggling meant I wasn't trying hard enough. So I did what I thought I had to. I pretended. I told myself that if I could just be what they wanted, maybe the feeling of being lost would just go away. But Wonderland doesn't work that way, and neither did my mind. The more I tried to fit into the mold, the more fractured I became. Because no matter how much I smiled, how much I nodded, how much I lied to convince myself and everyone else that I was fine, deep down, I knew I wasn't. Breaking points rarely happen all at once. They creep up on you, piece by piece, like Alice wandering through Wonderland, one bizarre encounter after another, until suddenly you realize you don't recognize the world around you anymore. That's what happened to me. For years, I lived in a carefully crafted illusion, much like Alice, convincing herself that if she just followed the rules of Wonderland, she might eventually find her way home. I told myself that as long as I kept moving, as long as I kept performing, as long as I didn't stop to feel anything too deeply, I would be okay. And for a while, that worked. Or at least I convinced myself it did. But looking back, the signs were always there, lurking like the Cheshire Cat, appearing in fleeting moments of exhaustion, vanishing before I could fully grasp what they meant. The feeling of being trapped inside my own mind, much like Alice trapped in the White Rabbit's house, growing too big for the space I had forced myself into. The way I would lose hours at a time staring at a wall, not even realizing how much time had passed. I kept myself busy to avoid thinking. I poured myself into distractions, relationships, work, mindless scrolling. Anything that kept me from being alone with my thoughts. And then, one day, it stopped working. I remember the exact moment when everything inside me cracked. Much like Alice standing before the Queen of Hearts, realizing that none of this made sense. That nothing was what it seemed. I was sitting in my room, staring at the floor, and for the first time, I let myself ask the question I had been avoiding for years. How much longer can I do this? And that single thought unraveled me because I didn't have an answer. I had spent my entire life surviving, running from one chaotic scene to the next. Much like Alice running from the Mad Hatter's tea party to the Queen's court, trying to make sense of a world that refused to play fair. But in all of that running, I had never stopped to ask myself what I was running toward. I had no idea how to actually just live. In Alice in Wonderland, Alice keeps trying to make sense of a world that refuses to follow logic. She shrinks, she grows, she adapts to absurdity, all while trying to convince herself that if she just plays along, she'll find her way home. But eventually, she realizes that nothing in Wonderland makes sense, and that pretending otherwise is only making things worse. There's a term in psychology called ego depletion. It happens when you spend so much energy suppressing your emotions, denying your needs, and forcing yourself into a mold that wasn't meant for you, that eventually you just break. Your brain literally runs out of resources to keep the illusion going. That's why breaking points feel so sudden. But they aren't sudden at all. They are years, sometimes decades in the making. The hardest part of reaching a breaking point isn't the pain. It's the realization that you've been lying to yourself. That the life you thought you were building wasn't real. That the person you thought you were was just a survival mechanism, pieced together to fit into a world that never made room for you. And when that illusion shatters, it feels like losing everything. I had spent so much time pretending to be okay that I didn't know what to do once I admitted I wasn't. It was like Alice realizing that no matter how many times she changed size, she still didn't belong anywhere. And in that moment, I was faced with the terrifying truth. I had no idea who I was outside of my pain. And that's when the real question started. What if I wasn't broken? What if I had just been trying to survive in a world that never made space for me? What if everything I had been taught about myself, my worth, my abilities, my identity, was all wrong? That's the thing about breaking points. They feel like the end. But in reality, they're just the beginning. Just like Alice waking up from her dream, realizing she didn't have to accept the madness of Wonderland as her truth, I, too, had a choice. I could keep playing by the rules that were never meant to serve me, or I could start questioning everything. After the breaking point, after the questions start, comes the fear. And not just any fear. The kind that grips you so tightly, it feels like drowning. Like tumbling down the rabbit hole with no idea where you'll land. Because here's the thing they don't tell you about self-discovery. It requires losing everything you thought you were. And that's terrifying. Alice knew this fear. She watched herself shrink, grow, and change over and over, unsure of what version of herself was real. She struggled with identity just as I did, just as so many of us do. Who am I? She asked the caterpillar. But the answer wasn't simple, because identity isn't fixed. It shifts, unravels, and reforms in ways we don't always understand. For so long, I clung to the identity I had built for myself. The Queen of Hearts, the one who didn't need anyone, who controlled every situation, who kept people at a distance because it was safer that way. I wasn't just playing a role. I believed I had to be that person to survive. Just like the Queen of Hearts ruled Wonderland through fear, I ruled my own world through control. Convinced that if I let go, if I let people get too close, it would just fall apart. And when I started questioning everything, I realized something that shook me to my core. I didn't actually know who I was without that armor. Who was I if I wasn't the one who always had it together or didn't always have it together? Who was I if I wasn't the one holding all the power in every relationship? Who was I if I allowed myself to be vulnerable, to be seen and heard? Alice had to lose herself to find herself. She had to face the madness of Wonderland, to question everything she thought she knew before she could wake up and see the truth. And maybe that's what self-discovery really is. Not just asking who we are, but daring to let go of who we thought we had to be. Alice didn't step into Wonderland with a clear sense of who she was. She questioned herself constantly, changing sizes, adapting to strange rules, and trying to make sense of a world that refused to be logical. And in many ways, that's what self-discovery feels like. Disorienting, uncomfortable, and terrifying. In psychology, there's something called identity foreclosure. It happens when we commit to a version of ourselves too early, before we've actually explored who we are. Many of us don't choose our identity. It's given to us. Our parents, society, past traumas, all of these things shape who we think we are. Just like Alice struggled to remember if she was the same girl who started her journey, many of us wake up one day and realize we've been living by a script that was never really ours. And when we start questioning those identities, it feels like death. Because in a way it is. The old version of you has to die to make room for who you really are. And let's be honest, grief is messy. Even when you're letting go of something toxic, even when you know it's necessary, it still hurts. That's why so many people never take the step. Because losing yourself, even when you know you're only losing the parts that were never truly you, is one of the hardest things you'll ever do. Alice had to let go of the girl who she thought she was. She had to face absurdity, chaos, and uncertainty before she could wake up and return to the real world, changed, but finally herself. And that's the journey we all have to take. The question isn't just, who am I? It's, who am I willing to become? Alice knew what it was like to lose herself, quite literally. She shrank so small, she disappeared. Then grew so large, she didn't recognize herself. She spoke to creatures who challenged her very perception of reality, who made her question her own name, her own memories, her own existence. And that's exactly what it feels like when you start questioning everything you thought you were. For me, losing myself felt like floating in an endless void. No more masks, no more distractions, no more pretending, just me, and I didn't even know what that meant. There were days where I felt free, like I had finally broken the chains that had been keeping me trapped for so long. Like Alice when she realized she didn't have to play by Wonderland's rules. I felt moments of clarity, moments where I thought, this is it. This is who I am. And then And then there were the days where I felt like I was unraveling. Like I had made a mistake. Like maybe I should have just stayed in my illusion because at least it was familiar. Maybe the White Rabbit had been right to rush through life without stopping. Maybe the Mad Hatter's nonsense made more sense than I wanted to admit. The fear of losing yourself is really the fear of the unknown. Because if you aren't who you thought you were, then who are you? Alice had to navigate the madness before she could wake up. She had to let go of certainty, let go of who she thought she was before she could find her way home. And maybe that's the real secret of self-discovery. It's not about finding a new identity. It's about daring to exist without one long enough to figure out who you truly are. Some coping strategies for facing identity loss is it's okay to mourn the old version of yourself. Even if they were built from the pain, they still kept you safe for a long time. Not knowing who you are isn't a failure. It's a beginning. Lean into the discomfort. Let yourself explore without needing immediate answers. Who are you when no one is watching? What brings you joy when there's no expectations attached to it? What do you love, not because someone told you to, but because it feels right? Surround yourself with people who let you be messy, who don't expect you to have it all figured out. You don't have to do this alone. So what happens after you start questioning? What happens when you finally admit that maybe, just maybe, the life that you've been living wasn't meant for you? Alice didn't have a map to guide her through Wonderland. She had to navigate the absurdity on her own, making sense of the riddles that had no answers and meeting characters who challenged her perception of reality. And that's what rebuilding yourself feels like. Wandering through the unknown without a clear destination, hoping that somehow you'll recognize home when you'll find it. But here's the thing. Alice didn't stay lost forever. She pieced together fragments of truth along the way, learning that the rules of Wonderland didn't define her. And that's what we have to do too. Rebuilding starts with small, quiet truths. The things that make you feel alive. The moments where you feel most like yourself. The interests you buried. The dreams you let go of. The voice inside of you that was drowned out by expectation and fear. It's not about becoming someone new. It's about remembering who you were before the world told you who to be. And just like Alice had to face the Queen of Hearts and stand her ground, you have to confront the parts of yourself that are still clinging to the old story. The part that says you don't deserve change. The part that's afraid of failure. The part that still believes the voices that told you who you had to be. Rebuilding isn't about rushing to the end of the story. It's about daring to keep going, even when the path ahead doesn't make sense. Even when you feel lost. Because as Alice learned, sometimes being lost is the first step to finding out who you really are. Some coping strategies for navigating the unknown are sitting with the discomfort instead of running from it. Pay attention to your thoughts. Notice the patterns. Ask yourself, where did this belief come from? Is it true? Or was it given to me? When I started questioning everything, my thoughts were overwhelming. Journaling became a way to sort through the chaos. Writing without censorship, without judgment, just letting my real voice come through helps tremendously. For so long, I shamed myself for feeling too much, for being too emotional. But I've learned that emotions aren't the enemy. Shame is. At the moment you stop punishing yourself for who you are, is the moment you start becoming who you're meant to be. Finding my chosen family saved me. Surround yourself with people who see you, not just the version you present, but the real you, the raw, unfiltered, messy, beautiful you. If you want to change your life, if you want to break free from the patterns that have kept you trapped, you have to start with the hardest thing of all. You have to face the lies you've been told. And I don't just mean the lies other people told you. I mean the lies you've told yourself. Think of Alice as she wandered deeper into Wonderland, meeting strange characters who twisted reality and changed her understanding of truth. The Cheshire Cat, for example, offered cryptic advice that didn't seem to follow any kind of logic. But perhaps the most significant thing about his words was that they made Alice realize the world she had always known was nothing like it appeared. She had been told one thing, but Wonderland made her question everything. The lies we tell ourselves are like that, comfortable illusions that keep us grounded in a world that's easier to understand, even if it's not true. We tell ourselves that we're not worthy, that we have to conform, that we aren't enough. We bury our true selves beneath the layers of expectations and fears, all because it feels safer to live within the confines of a lie than to risk facing the unknown truth. But if Alice had stayed in the comfort of the familiar, if she had listened to the rules of Wonderland without questioning them, she never would have discovered the strength to stand up to the Queen of Hearts or challenge the madness around her. She never would have found her way back home. Facing the lies you have been told isn't easy. It's painful and uncomfortable, just like Alice's journey through Wonderland. But just as she had to confront the absurdities of the world to find her own path, we too must confront the lies in our own mind if we ever want to move beyond them. The first step in truly changing your life is daring to see things for what they are, even if that means letting go of the comfort you've built around your own story. Like Alice, we have to question ourselves. What is real? What is truth? And most importantly, who am I really without all of the lies? For most of my life, I lived by a set of rules I never questioned. Rules about who I was allowed to be, how I was supposed to act, what I was worth. And I didn't realize until much later that none of those rules were actually mine. Some of them came from my parents, who had their own fears and expectations. Some of them came from the people who bullied me in junior high, planting the belief that I would never be enough. Some of them came from a society that told me emotions were a weakness, that vulnerability was dangerous, and that I had to be strong all of the time or risk being left behind. And then there were lies I told myself to survive. If I'm not perfect, I won't be loved. If I don't stay in control, everything will fall apart. If I stop being useful, people will leave me. If I show my real emotions, I'll be too much. I had built an entire identity around these lies, and questioning them felt like ripping out the foundation of my entire life. Psychologists call these cognitive distortions, patterns of thinking that warp our perception of reality. When we're young, our brains are wired to absorb information without question. It's a survival mechanism. We take what our parents, teachers, and society tell us and accept it as truth because at that stage in life, questioning authority could mean life or death. But here's the problem. Those early beliefs don't just disappear. They become the script that plays in the background of our minds. And if we never stop to challenge them, they control our entire lives without us even realizing it. It's much like Alice's experience in Wonderland. Every character she meets imposes their own set of rules, from the nonsensical tea party to the Queen of Hearts' tyrannical decrees. At first, Alice accepts the chaos around her without question. The strange creatures and shifting logic seem like the way the world works, and she wonders if she's the one who's out of place. But as she continues to encounter bizarre and contradictory rules, she starts to realize that the world she's in doesn't make any sense. It's full of distorted beliefs, illusions that control her actions without reason. This is how cognitive distortions work. Like the bizarre rules of Wonderland, they make us feel like we're living in a world where the irrational is normal, where our thoughts and beliefs feel so deeply ingrained that we don't question them. We just accept them, even though they're warped. For example, we believe things like, I'm not good enough to be loved. I always have to be in control. If I'm vulnerable, I will be rejected. These distorted thoughts are the rules that guide us, and often we don't even realize that they're there. They become so deeply embedded in our psyche, just like Wonderland rules, that we accept them as the truth without question. But just as Alice has to challenge the mad rules of Wonderland, the first step in changing our lives is daring to question those distorted beliefs. And that's where the terror lies, because once you begin to question, there's no going back. Just like Alice can't unsee the madness of Wonderland, we can't unsee the cracks in the foundation of the beliefs we've held for so long. So once you start, you'll begin to see how the distortions play out in your life, the false scripts you've been following without even realizing it. The question then becomes, do you keep living by these old beliefs? Or do you rewrite your own script and create your own reality? Just as Alice took that leap of faith and started questioning Wonderland's logic, we too must take the step to question everything we've been taught about ourselves, our worth, and our place in the world. It's scary, yes, but it's the first step toward freedom, the first step toward truly discovering who we are beneath lies we've been told. For me, the unlearning process was brutal. It wasn't just about realizing the lies. I had to fight my own mind every single day to replace them with truths. And that's not easy when your brain has spent decades reinforcing a false narrative. It was a lot like Alice in Wonderland. When she falls down the rabbit hole, everything she knows about reality is turned upside down. The rules of the world are distorted and everything around her feels wrong. At first, Alice doesn't know how to navigate Wonderland because she's trapped in a reality that doesn't make sense. She faces constant contradictions. The White Rabbit tells her one thing, the Cheshire Cat offers confusing advice, and the Queen of Hearts imposes arbitrary rules. But despite the confusion, Alice persists. She doesn't stop questioning. I had to do the same thing. I had to start questioning everything I thought I knew about myself, just like Alice had to question everything she thought she knew about the world she was in. I had to remind myself over and over again that I wasn't worthless just because someone made me feel that way when I was a kid. I had to stop trying to fit into a mold that wasn't mine and start carving out a space to be my authentic self. Just like Alice, I had to let go of her expectations of what Wonderland should be. I had to stop measuring my worth by what I could offer people and start asking myself, who am I when I'm not trying to earn love? But the truth is, the scariest part of this process is that I don't have an answer right away. I didn't know who I was without all the labels and stories I had been told about myself. But just like Alice, I kept going. She didn't know where the rabbit hole would lead, but she kept moving forward, trusting that there was something more waiting for her at the end. And that's what I need you to understand. You don't have to have all the answers yet. You just have to start asking the right questions. Even if you feel lost in Wonderland, even if you feel like you're in a place that doesn't make sense. The questions are the key to finding your own truth. And just like Alice, when you dare to ask, you'll start to unravel the lies and discover who you truly are beneath them. Keep going, even when it's uncomfortable. Even when you don't have all the answers, you're already on the right path. When you start questioning everything, you don't immediately find peace. In fact, the first thing you find is chaos. Nobody warns you about this part. They make healing sound like this beautiful, enlightening journey where you slowly become the best version of yourself. But what they don't tell you is that before clarity, there's confusion. Before healing, there's destruction. It's like Alice when she first enters Wonderland. She's suddenly in a world that doesn't make any sense, filled with characters that talk in riddles and rules that seem arbitrary. At first, Alice is overwhelmed by the absurdity of it all. There's no clear path, no guide to show her the way. She feels lost, much like how you might feel when you start questioning everything about yourself. The beliefs, the behaviors, the patterns. You feel like you're floating in a sea of uncertainty. I remember when I first started my own journey of questioning, it felt like everything I thought I knew was falling apart. My old identity, the one I had so carefully built, started to crumble, and with it came with an emotional storm. One day I would feel free, and the next I'd feel like I was sinking. One day I was filled with clarity, and the next I was buried under the weight of confusion and grief. Alice experienced the same kind of emotional upheaval in Wonderland. She didn't find answers immediately. She faced constant obstacles and struggles and challenged everything she thought she knew. There was no neat and tidy path for her to follow, just chaos and confusion. But through that chaos, Alice discovered something deeper about herself. She started learning the rules of Wonderland, and in doing so, she began to find her way. And that's how it is in real life, too. The chaos is part of the process. It's uncomfortable, yes, but it's necessary. You have to lose your footing, question everything, and break things down before you can rebuild. Before you can find clarity, you have to embrace the mess, the confusion, and the uncertainty. It's in this space that transformation begins. If you're going through this chaos right now, I need you to know that you're not alone. The confusion is temporary. Just like Alice, you might feel lost. But every step you take, even when it feels like you're going in circles, is part of the journey to discover your true self. The clarity will come, but it has to come after the chaos. You have to trust the process, even when it's messy. And just like Alice learned to navigate Wonderland, you will start to learn how to navigate the uncertainty of your own life. You don't need to have all the answers right now. You just need to trust that through the chaos, you are on the path towards something more authentic, something more real. Keep going. The clarity will come just as surely as Alice found her way through the madness. Neuroscience shows that our brains are wired for familiarity. Even if what's familiar is toxic, painful, or limiting, it still feels safer than the unknown. That's why people stay in situations that hurt them. That's why we cling to identities that no longer serve us. Because stepping into the unknown triggers the part of our brain that associates uncertainty with danger. That's why questioning everything feels like losing control. It's why your mind fights you every step of the way, trying to pull you back into the comfort of old patterns. Because even through those patterns, we're suffocating you. At least they were predictable. It's like Alice tumbling down the rabbit hole into Wonderland. She's not just physically falling, she's falling into a world where the rules no longer make sense. Everything she thought she knew about how the world worked is turned upside down. She's lost, she's confused, and she's unsure of which way to go. But the very nature of Wonderland forces her to question everything. Every moment challenges her assumptions about who she is, what's real, and what she's capable of. Just like Alice, when you start questioning everything about yourself, it feels like you're losing control. Your brain doesn't like that feeling. It clings to the familiar, even if the familiar is what's holding you back. And just like Alice, there will be moments where you wonder if you should turn back, return to the comfort of your old self, and avoid the chaos. But that's the thing about change. It feels like a loss of control because you're breaking free from what was once safe. The old patterns were limiting, suffocating, and predictable, but they provided a sense of security. When Alice starts her journey in Wonderland, she feels out of control. She's disoriented, unsure of what's going on, and there are moments when she wishes she could just wake up from this chaotic dream. But the more she embraces the unpredictability of Wonderland, the more she learns about herself, the more she adapts to the chaos, the clearer her path becomes. But she doesn't get to clarity without first stepping into the unknown, and neither do you. The discomfort you're feeling right now, the fear of losing control, is a sign that you're on the right path. When you start questioning everything, your brain pushes back because it doesn't want to let go of what's familiar. But this is the process of transformation. You're moving from one way of being to another. It's messy, it's uncomfortable, and it feels like you're losing control. But in reality, you're gaining a new sense of freedom. Just like Alice, who finds strength as she navigates Wonderland, you too will find your way through chaos. Trust that even though it feels like you're losing control, you're actually regaining it, but in a way you've never experienced before. Change doesn't mean you've lost control. It means you're taking back control from the old, limiting patterns that kept you stuck. Keep going. The clarity will come, and you'll be amazed at what you find on the other side. This is the middle part, where most people turn back, where the old identity has been shattered, but the new one hasn't fully formed, when you feel like you're floating in the abyss with no clear sense of who you are or where you're going. For me, this stage was pure agony. I felt like I had torn everything down, but I didn't know how to rebuild. I felt exposed, raw, like I had stripped away every layer of protection, but had nothing to replace it with. And the temptation to go back, to slip into old habits, to retreat into the version of myself that felt safe, was overwhelming. But I didn't. Because I knew something now that I didn't know before. The only way out was through. It's like Alice lost in Wonderland, wandering through a strange and confusing world. At first, everything about Wonderland is alien to her. Nothing makes sense, and the deeper she goes, the more disorienting it becomes. In those moments, she could have easily given up, turned back to the world she knew, where things at least felt familiar, even if they were limiting. But that wouldn't have led her to her truth. In fact, when Alice first falls into Wonderland, everything is chaotic. She's constantly shrinking and growing, unsure of who she is or where she belongs. She's facing the unknown, and at times she feels like she's losing herself. And yet, she persists. Even when everything around her seems nonsensical, she keeps moving forward. There's a moment when Alice wonders if she should just leave Wonderland altogether. But deep down, she knows that the only way to discover who she really is to keep going. This is the messy middle, when you're shedding the old self but having it stepped fully into who you are becoming. It's when the temptation to revert to your old patterns, to your old ways of thinking and being, is the loudest. It's when you feel most vulnerable, and the fear of being exposed and raw threatens to pull you back to safety. But just like Alice, you have to trust that this chaotic phase is just part of the process. It feels like everything is falling apart, but it's really just the foundation of being reset. As hard as it is, you have to keep going. Because once you push through this, once you get through the mess, that's when you begin to rebuild. That's when the clarity starts to form. And just as Alice discovers the more about herself as she moves through this Wonderland, you too will find yourself in the midst of the chaos. The key is to keep moving forward, even when it feels like you're getting lost in it at all. The only way out is through. If you make it through the chaos, through the discomfort, through the urge to run back to what's familiar, something incredible happens. You start to see glimpses of who you really are. It's like Alice when she first steps into Wonderland and experiences all the bizarre and unpredictable world around her. At first, everything is overwhelming. But as she continues to navigate the strange new environment, she begins to see new aspects of herself emerge. It's in the confusion and chaos of Wonderland that she starts to realize she's capable of more than what she thought. She isn't just the girl who fell down the rabbit hole. She's someone who can think for herself, make decisions, and face challenges she never imagined. Her journey through uncertain and chaotic begins to reveal her true resilience. In the same way as you move through chaos of questioning everything, you begin to uncover parts of yourself that were hidden or buried under layers of old beliefs. You might catch glimpses of the person you've always been, the person you've always wanted to be, and the person who has been waiting to emerge. And just like Alice, these moments of clarity don't come all at once. They come in fragments, small glimpses that start to stitch together the bigger picture of who you truly are. These glimpses, they can come in the form of small victories, like feeling a sense of peace when you stand up for yourself, or noticing a spark of joy when you do something that feels authentic. They can come in moments of introspection, where you realize that the old lies no longer have power over you. Each time you dare to live more fully as yourself, these glimpses get a little clearer and a little brighter. And even if they feel fleeting, they're important. They are the first sign that the real you is beginning to take shape. Alice's adventure isn't about finding one definitive answer or goal. It's about exploring, growing, and adapting to the world around her. Similarly, discovering who you really are is a journey, one that unfolds little by little as you shed the old layers and embrace what feels true for you. These glimpses don't have to be grand revelations. They can be small shifts in perspective that tell you you're on the right path. This is when the work starts to pay off, when the confusion begins to clear, even just a little, and you start to feel more like yourself than you felt in a long time. It's like finding your way out of the maze of uncertainty and into a space where you can breathe and finally take a step into the direction of who you really are. You may not have all the answers yet, but you're on your way. Just like Alice, stepping further into Wonderland and getting closer to the understanding of the world around her and herself. For the first time, I allowed myself to exist without performing. I stopped pretending to have all the answers. I stopped filtering my emotions to make other people comfortable. I let myself be messy, uncertain, unfinished. And in that space, I started discovering things about myself I had never noticed before. I wasn't just the Queen of Hearts. I was also the girl who loved late-night conversations, who found peace in silence, who could feel joy without needing a reason. And I wasn't just the one who held everything together, or not at all. I was also the girl who could fall apart and be worthy. It's like Alice, when she begins to strip away all the confusion and the chaos of Wonderland and starts making her own choices, she begins to uncover hidden parts of herself. She's no longer just a girl who's lost in trying to figure out the rules of an unpredictable world. She's someone capable of making decisions, adapting and discovering the depth of her own character. She learns that she's not defined by her situation. She's defined by her own willingness to explore, to question, and to accept herself fully, even when she doesn't have all the answers. In my own journey, that's when I started finding pieces of myself I didn't know there were. Each time I allowed myself to become more than the version I thought I had to be, I uncovered something new. It was as though I was peeling back layers, like Alice stepping through the looking glass, slowly discovering new dimensions of who I was and who I could become. It wasn't easy, and it wasn't quick, but each moment felt like a step towards something more real and more authentic. I wasn't just the persona I had created to survive. I was someone more fluid, more complex, more open. In those quiet moments of just existing without trying to be anything, I found space to reconnect with the parts of myself that I had long forgotten. Like Alice standing in the Garden of Wonders, I began to see my own possibilities, unfiltered and true. And little by little, I started piecing together a new version of myself, not based on what I thought I had to be, but on who I actually was. This wasn't about perfection, and it wasn't about fitting into some mold of what I was supposed to look like or be. It was about discovering the parts of me that had always been there, waiting to be recognized. Just like Alice, I learned that journey wasn't about finding the perfect path or the right answer. It was about learning to be okay with who I was in every messy, imperfect moment. The most shocking thing about this journey, the moment you stop trying to fit into someone else's version of you, the right people will start showing up. When you stop performing, you attract people who love the real you. When you stop people-pleasing, you find relationships built on honesty instead of obligation. When you stop hiding, you create space for connections that are deeper, rawer, more real. After questioning Wonderland's unsensical rules, Alice started to make her own decisions and discover who she truly is. Throughout the journey, she's forced to adapt and act on her own terms, no longer just following orders or shrinking to fit in. And in doing so, she finds the courage to stand up to the absurdity around her by letting go of the roles that others expected her to play. Alice eventually starts seeing herself not through the eyes of others, but through her own. When you start living for yourself, it's as if the fog lifts and you can finally breathe. The parts of you that once felt too much, too intense, or too complex finally become the things that draw people in. Like Alice, when you embrace your own truth, however strange or messy, it's no longer a burden, but a gift. You realize that you were never too much. You were never broken. You were just trying to survive in a world that didn't see you. But now you see yourself, and like Alice finding her way through Wonderland, you start discovering a new reality, a reality that you create, one that aligns with your true self. And as you embrace that, everything begins to fall into place. So here's my question for you. Who would you be if you weren't afraid? Think about Alice, who took that leap down that rabbit hole, not knowing where it would lead or what she'd find. She didn't know if she would ever get back to where she started, or if the world she was about to step into would even make sense. But she was brave enough to question everything: the rules, the expectations, even her own identity. In that uncertainty, she discovered a world filled with possibility, one where she could define who she was, free from the constraints she once accepted. And in doing so, she embraced her own power, her own voice. What if you could do the same? What if you could live without the fear of judgment, of failure, or of not fitting in? Who would you become if you could embrace your authentic self, unapologetically? Take a moment to reflect on that. Because sometimes the first step to discovering who you truly are is daring to question everything, even the fears that have been holding you back.